Our reading this morning is taken from Colossians, chapter 1, verses 15 through 23. The Son is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For in him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities, all things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. He is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning and the firstborn from among the dead, so that in everything he might have supremacy. For God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in him, and through him to reconcile himself to all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through his blood shed on the cross. Once you were alienated from God and were enemies in your minds because of your evil behavior. But now he has reconciled you by Christ's physical body through death to present you holy in his sight, without blemish and free of accusation. If you continue in your faith, established and firm, and do not move from the hope held out in the gospel. This is the gospel that you have heard and has been proclaimed to every creature under heaven, of which I, Paul, have become a servant. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Thanks, Aubrey. Oop. My object lesson is running away from me. More to come on that. So this is exciting, really, to be here. Someday I'm going to ask Andy to bring me back to Larchmont. We were praying this morning, and I was realizing that, Larchmont was my first home. I was born in the city. I lived there for a couple months. Don't remember anything. And then we moved to Larchmont. And I was there till I was 10 years old. And so the thought of now working for a church that's coming into that town where I started is such a full circle moment. And I was thinking, man, God knew that even back then. We didn't know that. But how cool is it that the roots of that church were already being formed even before any of us did that? So when we're in Larchmont, I want to come back. So we've been in this series talking about Steadfast, meeting our need for a firm foundation. And we all, if we're honest, we know there's so much shifting around. It can be hard to find a firm foundation. I think about a week ago, my wife and I were sitting up, and it was before bed, and she was watching the news and just, little news channels and just getting feed after feed, and I was just kind of listening to it. And it started out, war going on, and then it was inflation coming up and, pain at the pump. And then it was like, hey, there's a new strain of COVID coming out. And I think the newscaster said at that moment, he's like, I wouldn't get too used to not having masks on. It looks like we're going back. And to me, I heard everything that we just got out of, we're going back into. And I started literally having a physical reaction to that. I was having trouble breathing. I stood up and I was like, you got to turn that off. This is really going on. And I had to walk in the next room where I was reminded, it was, God was like, hey, you're preaching about this in a couple days. And I literally started saying out loud the words of this scripture. The Son is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For in him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authority. All things have been created through him and for him. He's before all things, and in him all things hold together. Amen. And I needed that in that moment, because literally I was like pre-panic attack here. And sometimes we just need to stop and we need to tell ourselves, oh yeah, Jesus. And that's exactly where the church was in Colossae. They had a great start, but they had lost their way a little bit. And Paul's writing to this church to help bring them back to where they were. And this is a church that he hasn't even been to, which is crazy. You think of the Apostle Paul going everywhere, but he's never even been there. And he's writing them a letter, and he's sending it through this guy, Epaphras, who was one of his converts in the town of Ephesus. And Epaphras, apparently really took the gospel, and he's like, hey, I want to take this message to my hometown, which is about 120 miles to the east, a little south of here. And Paul's like, go for it. And they started a church there that would become the Colossian church. And Paul's in prison, which also is crazy because he's in prison for the gospel, writing a letter saying, hey guys, the gospel still works. This is Paul from prison. Which, that's a strong case for the gospel, isn't it? Any situation, it still works. And this town was a very cosmopolitan town. It had many races, many religions were represented. You had astrology and animism, all the Greek and Roman pantheons, and Judaism, and everything was in this mishmash. And this little church, this little Christian church was formed, and it was bearing fruit. And we know that because Paul commends them, right? Hey, you guys are doing great. If you were here for a couple weeks ago when Andy was introducing this, he was talking about the wacky racers, right? It looks like we're going to win until our engine falls out, and then, now we can't go at all. And that's kind of where this church was. It was teetering on the brink of something. And Paul was writing them to bring them back to the centrality and the supremacy of Jesus Christ. There wasn't really one particular thing going on. It was sort of a mishmash. And there's a word that perfectly describes it. It's called syncretism, which is not a word we use all the time, right? Hey, watch out for that syncretism over there. But think of it like this. It's the blending of two or more religious beliefs into a new system, or the incorporation into religious tradition, the beliefs from unrelated traditions. And when I was a kid, growing up here in Larchmont, as a matter of fact, we used to have dreams, like when it would snow, we were like, okay, we are going to build the most epic snowman ever constructed, right? Like, my little kid brain was like, it's going to be taller than the house, even though I could never reach that high, and people are going to come around from miles around to see this snowman. And if you've ever done that, you start out with a little snowball, and you push it, and you push it, and you push it, and as it gets bigger and bigger, it gets heavier and heavier. So we had a little hill in our backyard, and we would always start at the top, and we would always try to roll it in the clean white snow so we'd have this perfect snowman. But eventually this snowball would get heavy, and it would pick up all the snow, right down to the grass and the sticks and the leaves and the dirt, and that would get picked up too. And what started out as white and pure was cluttered with whatever it picked up. And that's what Paul was talking about. It was started out as pure Christianity, but as other things came in, it was little things added to it. And they were losing that centrality of Jesus Christ. I was talking to a pastor, and he was telling me about a church that he had come to, and he was brand new in the church. And he was sitting down, and he was trying to get to know the congregation, and he was talking a lot about Jesus. And they said, listen, you got to meet with this guy. He's one of the big donors of the church, probably helping to keep the church afloat. And so they were having breakfast together, and as this pastor's sitting down, this guy starts talking. He goes, hey, so you're talking a lot about Jesus. Maybe there are other things we can talk about, because there are all kinds of, and apparently what this guy did was he started grabbing things off the table. He's like, look, you got Jesus of the Bible Jesus, you got Buddha Jesus, you got New Age Jesus, Hindu, it's just like it's all Jesus, right? And it's all going that way. Let's talk about some of that stuff. And this pastor was like, pushed everything aside and left the one standing and said, no, there's only Jesus. And that's what we're going to talk about. He said, man, I watched that donor walk out the door and I didn't know what was going to happen to our little church. But that's where we are as a church. We have to be centered on Jesus. In this Colossian church, they were losing this idea of Jesus being preeminent, being first in all things. And that's the key to this whole letter. That's what Paul's writing about. We can't, as Christians, rely on our own goodness. It's only on the goodness of Jesus. And Paul is putting great emphasis on Christ. In fact, he's so excited about it, he wrote this passage that we just read, which is a poem or a hymn. I mean, it's like, Jesus is so awesome, I'm going to write it out poetically. And then this syncretism came in, this mixture came in, which tried to turn the pure, simple gospel back into religion. You know, religion, that's what we do to make our way. I, years ago, was teaching a class. It was called Contagious Christianity. It was this really kind of, how do you do evangelism in normal life? What does that look like? And so you'd have a workbook and you'd talk a little bit, and then they'd show these video clips that were meant to be natural, normal situations where you could talk about Jesus. And I remember there was this one, two guys come out of the gym and it's like, whew, Bob, that was a good workout. Yeah. He's like, hey, you want to go get a bite afterwards? And he's like, nah, I'm sorry, man, I can't. I have to go to church. He's like, church? I never thought you were religious. And he's like, well, I'm not religious, but I am a Christian, and there is a difference, right? And so this is the perfect lead in. And he said, let me tell it to you this way. He said, all religions, actually, of the world can be summed up in one two-letter word. And he wrote in a napkin the word do, D-O. So there it is. It's all about what we do, right? It's all about what we do to get to the next level, to get to whatever the afterlife is that we believe in, to advance, to grow. It's all about what we do, but Christianity is different, and it can be represented by the word D-O-N-E, done. It's not about what we do, it's about what Jesus has done already for us. Now, good works flow out of that as we grow closer to Jesus, but we don't stand before God and say, I was a really good person. That will not get you far at all. It's all about Jesus. And in this hymn, Paul is going to give us three important truths. The first one is that the Son is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. And 2 weeks ago, Andy talked about this idea that as we look at Jesus, we see God. And as we understand who Jesus is, we can understand God. The more we look at him, the more we realize that the true God is the God of utter self-giving love, because that's what we see expressed in Jesus. But there's a tendency for us to try to make Jesus into our own image, right? To shrink him down to something we can understand. I don't know if you've ever seen Thomas Jefferson's Bible, but he took a razor blade and he cut out the parts that he didn't like. And he compiled what was left into this book, The Life and Morals of Jesus Christ. And he basically took away all the miracles and just left the teachings. Jesus was a good teacher. But if you heard a couple weeks ago, we don't have that as an option. That's the whole C.S. Lewis. He was either a liar, a lunatic, or he was the Lord. The second thing Paul gives us in this is Jesus' work in creation, and we're going to talk about that today. And the third thing is Jesus' headship over the church, which is next week's topic, so come back for that. But today we're going to look at these verses 16 and 17. For in him all things were created, things in heaven and earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or rulers or authorities, all things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. Paul's reminding the Colossians that Jesus is not small, and he is not a created being. He's the creator of all things. before he ever walked on water, he created the Sea of Galilee where that miracle took place. Before he ever spoke to the storm and said, "Be still," he created the wind that created the waves. Before he ever fed 5,000 people, he created the fish and the grain that would become the food for that miracle. Jesus was not ordinary. He's the creator of all things in heaven and earth, visible and invisible. And that's why in my freak out moment, I had to remember, wait a minute, all these things I'm seeing, all these things I'm hearing are not in control here. And we need to remember that too. Jesus is in control. Amen. And he created this amazing, incredible world. You know, a few years ago, we had a Trinity Kids retreat, TK retreat, and we took the kids up to Hume, and we called it In the Beginning. Like, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Or John 1, you know, in the beginning was the Word, which is Jesus, and he was with God, and he was God. And we read this verse in Romans to the kids, Romans 1:20, for since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse. And we were like, you know, you can learn what God's like by looking at what was created. And so I had a whole bunch of slides, and you know, as I was thinking about this, I was like, well, we got to see some of those slides because it was so much fun. So I'm going to show you a bunch of pictures, and I want you to think, all of these help tell me a little more about what Jesus is like. So we see God in the small things. We see him, look at that. How amazing is that? In the massive things. Check that out. Did you know there really is a white whale? Like, that's not photoshopped. I guess his name is Migdaloo, and he travels all over the world, and people know him. There you go. Check this one out. In the bizarre things. That is a blobfish. That is the saddest looking animal I have ever seen. But that little blobfish, he lives in the deep. How about in the beautiful things? Look at this, Yellowstone. Can you imagine that being like a real natural formation, just one of those hot mineral springs? It's incredible. The surprising things, look at this one. This one lives down in the deep. This is called a barrel eye fish. And just see those two little eyes above its mouth? Those aren't eyes. Those big green things are its eyes. It looks up. And it has fake eyes and a transparent head. Like, who thought of that? That's just crazy. And this next one will blow your mind because this is a real place in China. Look at this, the breathtaking things. I mean, I don't even know what to say about that, but our God thought, I'm just going to paint this part of the world like that, and we'll leave it beautiful. Creation is amazing, and all things are created by and through Jesus. And you know, when you see the intricacy and when you see the majesty of creation, sometimes it's easy to think, well, this God is so far beyond me. And you know, that's true. Psalms tells us this, Psalm 33:6, by the words of the Lord, the heavens were made, their starry host by the breath of his mouth. How big is Jesus? He's a star breather. That's incredible. I mean, when we face the things we face, how big is Jesus? He's a star breather. I don't know if you guys know Louis Giglio. He's the global pastor of Passion Church and Passion Conferences. And several years ago, he did this teaching, How Great is Our God? And I don't think I'll ever forget it. Louis, if you've never heard of him, is one of the most compelling communicators. Like, he takes you on a journey and you're with him every step of the way. And he was talking about, you know the song, How Great is Our God? Like, this had just come out. And so he did this whole teaching. He's like, look, I want to tell you how great our God is. And he said, look, here's a golf ball. So this is my object lesson. Here we go. Full circle now from dropping it in the beginning. And he said, if the earth was the size of a golf ball. And somewhere on it, you are. And then he started going progressively to different stars. He's like, the sun would be the size of, I don't even remember, a car. And then, you go out and he's like, but that's not even the big star. And then he'd go out to the Alpha Centauri. And he got all the way out to this star, VY Canis Majoris, the big dog star. It's literally what it means. And he said, this star is so big, the circumference is 1.7 billion miles around. That's how big this star is. And it's almost 5,000 light years away from us. So think about that. Light that starts at that star takes 4,900 years to get to Earth. That's how far away this is. That's how big the heavens are. And so he said, so if the Earth were the size of a golf ball, this star would be the size of Mount Everest. That's how different it is. And just to kind of put that in perspective, if you were standing on the top of Mount Everest, the rooftop of our world, you'd be looking 5.5 miles down at about, according to Google, about 13,000 square miles of mountain versus one golf ball. And somewhere on there, there are 7 billion little microscopic dots. It just wants to stay down there. But I feel like I might fall, so I'm going to put it in my pocket. And one of those 7 billion little microdots that you can't see is you. And yet the Bible tells us in Luke that even the hairs of your head are known. I mean, how many of you have taken the time to count your friend's hair? With Andy, it's not so hard. I can count to 0. But only God knows how many there would be if you grew it out. See, Jesus is like this. He's transcendent. He's so far above what we can even conceive. He's beyond our grasp. He breathes stars out. He is so incredible. Who can know the mind of God? Who could know? We can't. And yet, he's also imminent. He's closer than our next breath. The Colossian church had lost sight of the imminence of Jesus. Jesus was some big being far away, but they lost the closeness. So 2 weeks ago, I was at a play. My niece was in a play at Ridgefield High School, and the play was called the 25th Annual Putnam County Spelling Bee. I don't know if you've ever seen this, but it was hilarious. That's not from it. It was just I needed a spelling bee stock photo. But it was great because they would give these crazy words and crazy definitions, and it would go like this, and little fun factoids, right? So it'd be like, the next speller is Scott Tilton, and, you'd walk up to the microphone, and as you're walking up, they'd say, Scott can stick 6 Cheerios up each nostril, and you'd be like, okay. Scott, your word is phylactery. Phylactery, am I saying that right? Yes. Can I get a definition? Either of 2 small square leather boxes containing religious text, traditionally worn on the head and left arm by Jewish men during morning weekday prayers. Could I get a sentence? Billy, put down that phylactery. We're Episcopalians. And it would go from there. And so we were introduced to all these funny words and all these funny kids who were archetypes of different ones. And you had the nerd, you had the abandoned kid, you had the one who was just excited to be there. And then my niece was playing Marcy Park, the poster child for overachievers. Her song was I Speak 6 Languages. And it talked about how she was on a rugby team and she did all these amazing things, right? So she gets up and it's like, Marcy, your word is camouflage. And she goes, dear Jesus, can I get a more difficult word? Like, are you kidding me? And then in this play, Jesus answers her, and all of a sudden, the lights come on, and here comes Jesus marching down the aisle, who was played by a girl, which was a little troubling, but we're going to just dance around that. And they have this conversation about perfection and what it's like, and Marcy's going through this crisis where she's like, maybe I could just let it go and not get it right. And Jesus is like, hey, that's a good idea. You can do whatever you want to. And the part of the whole interchange that really bothered me was this Jesus character goes, I don't really care about things like that anyway. I'm not really bothered by that. I was like, that was the part. I was like, no, that is not who Jesus is. Even though he's so transcendent, above all we can even think about, he's close to us in a way that we can only imagine. Psalm 139 says it this way, you have searched me, O Lord, and you know me. You know when I sit and when I rise, you perceive my thoughts from afar. You discern my going out and my lying down. You are familiar with all my ways. Before a word is on my tongue, you, Lord, know it completely. You hem me in behind and before. You lay your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me, too lofty to attain. Jesus is closer than your next breath. Just think about that. Think about that when you have a moment, when you need to experience the nearness of God. Jesus is not just a star breather. He's also right here. Verse 17 says he's before all things, and in him all things hold together. He's the conqueror of all powers in the universe, and all authority in heaven and on earth is his. Even the forces of nature are under Jesus' control. I don't know if you've ever heard of strong nuclear force. It was a new term to me. But apparently there are 4 fundamental forces in physics. There's gravity. We're familiar with that one. It's a good thing we have that. Electromagnetism keeps electrons spinning. Then you have 2 forces at work in the nucleus of every atom, and one is strong nuclear force, which holds everything together. One is weak nuclear force that causes things to decay. But that strong nuclear force, which is a misnomer, kind of, because we're talking on an atomic level. So no matter how strong it is, we're talking about very tiny influence, but it keeps everything together. And without this strong nuclear force, every atom in the universe would explode. That would be a bad day for all of us, because, there are a lot of things made of atoms in the universe. And that's what Christianity is like without Christ. You take Christ out of Christianity, he loses his preeminence, and everything shatters. It is no longer Christianity. There's nothing apart from Christ, and therefore we owe ultimate allegiance to him. Not just part, but all. I was thinking about it like, what if I walked into my wife and I was like, I just want you to know, you are one of the more important women in my life. I mean, top 10, definitely, probably top 5. Those might be the last words I ever spoke. Right. Well, it's the same thing with Christ. He's preeminent. He has to be first in all things. It's not enough to simply come to Christ. We have to live for Christ. Right? We can't just keep him in a box that's convenient. Ooh, it's church time. Look, everybody, Jesus. Hey. Now I'm going out with the guys after work. Box goes away. was talking to a pastor friend who's in India, and he was telling me about the application process. I think at that time, and this was a while ago, they had over 1,000 pastors in their ministry. And he said when these pastors would fill out an application, there was one question: have you ever been beaten for the gospel of Jesus Christ? And he said, but we're really thinking of changing it to, how many times have you been beaten for the gospel of Christ? Because nobody ever answers no to that question. And if we want a faith that is more than just a faith that stands the good times and the convenient times, then we need to be rooted in Jesus Christ. Because not every time is a good time. Not every time is a fun time. We need a faith that goes beyond that. It's kind of like, do you remember the parable of the sower where Jesus is talking about a guy sowing seeds and there are different soils, and the second soil is a shallow soil. And so when the seeds hit the shallow soil, the sun hits the seeds quickly, and the plant grows up really strong and really fast, and it looks great until the sun comes and scorches it because it has no root. And we don't want to be Christians without that root. When I was a freshman in college, I used to go to a Bible study which was called Choice. Ironically, it was led by Louis Giglio, the guy who I showed you a picture of earlier. And I was walking down early on in my freshman year, my Bible under my arm, trucking down to go to Choice Bible Study, and it hit me like a thunderclap. I have a choice. I don't have to believe anything I've been taught. I mean, I told you, well, maybe I didn't tell you actually, but my parents came to faith when I was 5. So I didn't really remember a time where that wasn't the central worldview of our family, that, Jesus is real and he's our Savior. But this freshman year, I was like, wait a minute. I got to stop. I'm 2,000 miles from home. My parents aren't going to tell me what to believe. Nobody will know if I change my mind here and now. I've got to settle this for myself. And I sat down on a bench. I never made it to the Bible study. And I started wrestling out, what do I believe? And I asked myself questions like, what would the world be like if there was no Jesus? And it was pretty bleak. And I remember thinking, I've got to get this settled now because it's going to govern the way I live the rest of my life. See, this is... I think they're going to lower a guy from the ceiling, and Andy's going to pray for them. It's going to govern the way I live the rest of my life. And that's how it is when we come to Jesus. We don't come saying, some of me, part of me. You come and you say, Jesus, all of me. And we really only have 2 options, only 2 worldviews that we can live under. And if you believe the first one, that Jesus is, then you wholly give yourself to that. And if you believe the other one, that Jesus isn't, then work it out yourself, because you're responsible for your path and for your salvation. But those are the options we have. There's no middle ground here. There's no Jesus now, but not here because I don't want to be that way. There's no halfway. And so what we're going to do is we're going to respond to Jesus now. And yeah, we can get the band is going to come up. They're going to play a song, and it's a song that we did a couple weeks ago in one of our staff times of worship. And it's this song, I Surrender. And it was so powerful when we started singing, Lord, have your way in me. Lord, just have your way in me. And really, if we are going to take on the name of Christ, then that is our prayer. Lord, have your way in me. not holding back anything. So what we don't want to do here is get ourselves all hyped up. But what we do want to do is have an authentic moment where we simply come to Jesus and we say, Lord, this is me. The pieces, the brokenness, the failures, the successes, the good, the bad, and the ugly. This is me, Jesus. And I want to surrender to you, and I don't even know how sometimes. But Lord, could we have an authentic moment? Could we have a moment where just as you sing, as you pray, as you listen, as whatever is on your heart, I'm not asking for anything, but you just begin to open your heart to the possibility of surrendering all to Jesus. Not saying, Jesus, you can have everything except, you could call me anywhere except, just simply saying, I'm coming and I'm trusting that you're good and you love me because you know me, because you made me.